I'm a 34-year-old man, and for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a father. Life doesn't always go as planned, though. Years ago, I found out I was infertile. It was devastating at the time, but as I processed the news, I realized that being a dad wasn't about biology, it was about love, care, and commitment. Adoption became my dream, and recently I started making that dream a reality. Adoption as a single man isn't easy. There's a ton of preparation involved, emotionally and financially. I spent years saving money, working extra shifts, and building a stable environment to offer a child a good life. The process is thorough, as it should be, and every step felt like climbing a mountain. Still, I was determined. At first, my sister Rachel, who's 32, seemed supportive. She even joked about how I'd probably have a kid before she managed to have a second one. Rachel and her husband have a 6-year-old daughter but have been struggling financially, so I didn't think much of her comments. I figured she was just venting a bit of frustration. But as time went on, her tone shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just subtle remarks about how hard parenting is and how I might not realize what I was getting into. I brushed it off as typical sibling banter. Then, during a family gathering, things got more pointed. Rachel brought up my adoption plans in front of everyone, saying I should think about what's best for everyone instead of being selfish. I was caught off guard. Selfish? All I wanted was to give a child a loving home. But I let it slide, not wanting to make a scene. My parents stayed quiet, and the subject quickly changed, but the moment stuck with me. Despite Rachel's comments, I pressed forward. The home study was the next big hurdle, a detailed evaluation to determine if I was fit to adopt. It's intimidating, to say the least. Social workers visited my home, asked me endless questions, and reviewed my finances. It felt invasive but necessary. When I got the news that I'd passed, I was thrilled. It was a major milestone, and I thought my family would celebrate with me. Instead, Rachel seemed annoyed. She mentioned how lucky I was to have saved enough money for this process, hinting at her own struggles. It was awkward, but I tried not to let her comments dampen my excitement. However, not long after, I started hearing whispers. Extended family members called, expressing vague concerns about whether adoption was the right path for me. One even suggested I think carefully before going through with it. It didn't take long to figure out where these doubts were coming from. I confronted Rachel directly, asking if she'd been talking to the family about my plans. She denied it at first, but then claimed she was just worried about how our parents might handle the stress of me adopting. I didn't buy it. I told her this was my decision, and that I wasn't going to let anyone's opinion stop me. She shrugged it off but didn't seem happy. The toll of all this was starting to add up. Adoption isn't just emotionally draining, it's expensive, time-consuming, and full of uncertainties. Knowing that someone I cared about might be sabotaging my efforts was devastating. Still, when I got the call saying I'd been added to the waitlist to adopt a 3-year-old boy, I was overjoyed. It felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. But Rachel's reaction? A mix of indifference and passive aggressiveness. She started posting vague social media updates about people making reckless decisions and rushing into things. At first, I ignored it, but then family members started asking me if I was sure about the adoption. Rachel's words were getting to them, and it was infuriating. Then came the turning point. One evening, the adoption agency called. They'd received an anonymous tip questioning my suitability to be a parent. The tip alleged I was financially unstable and emotionally unprepared. Hearing this felt like a punch to the gut. The agency reassured me they were still moving forward with my case, but asked for additional documentation to clear up the concerns. I immediately suspected Rachel. Who else would go this far to undermine me? I was heartbroken and furious. Rachel had crossed a line, but when I tried to confront her again, she played dumb. She even implied that maybe the agency had legitimate reasons to double-check things. Her smugness was infuriating, but without concrete proof, I couldn't outright accuse her. Despite everything, I wasn't going to back down. I'd come too far to let someone else's bitterness derail my dream. This was about more than me, it was about giving a child a chance at a better life. Even if I had to fight tooth and nail, I wasn't giving up. The adoption process had tested me in ways I never expected, but it had also shown me just how strong my resolve was. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the battle. Update 1. When the adoption agency called me in for a meeting about the anonymous tip, I knew it wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I sat across from the caseworker, who explained the details of the complaint. It alleged that I was financially unstable and emotionally unprepared to care for a child. The words felt like a slap, but I stayed calm. They told me they needed additional financial documentation and references to confirm my suitability. It was frustrating but understandable. They had a child's best interests to consider. Back at home, I spent hours gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Bank statements, pay stubs, even a letter from my employer confirming my steady position. I contacted friends who had already agreed to be references, explaining the situation. They were shocked but supportive, offering to do whatever they could to help. While I was busy preparing, Rachel called. The conversation started off casual, but something about her tone was off. Then, she slipped. She mentioned details about the anonymous complaint, details I hadn't shared with anyone. My stomach dropped. How could she know that unless she was the one who made the call? When I pressed her, she tried to backtrack, saying she'd just heard things from the family. But the damage was done. I knew it was her. I ended the call and sat there, piecing everything together. Rachel's comments at family gatherings, her passive-aggressive posts, the sudden doubts being voiced by relatives, it all pointed back to her. She'd been undermining me from the start. I vented to a close friend later that night. They didn't mince words, telling me Rachel's actions were toxic and suggesting I distance myself from her. It wasn't easy to hear, but they were right. I couldn't let her sabotage this any further. The next day, I brought it up with my parents. My dad was furious. He said if Rachel had done this, I needed to cut ties with her for good. My mom, on the other hand, was defensive. She refused to believe Rachel would stoop so low, insisting there had to be a misunderstanding. This only added to the tension. Suddenly, my family was split down the middle, and Rachel wasn't making things any easier. She started calling relatives, painting me as obsessive and claiming I wasn't thinking clearly. A few of them bought into it, repeating her words back to me in carefully veiled conversations. The narrative she was building was relentless, but I refused to let it shake my resolve. I had come too far to give up now. Out of nowhere, Rachel's husband reached out. He apologized for her behavior, admitting that he didn't agree with what she was doing. But he stopped short of trying to stop her, saying it wasn't his place to interfere. It wasn't the outright support I wanted, but at least it confirmed I wasn't imagining things. Rachel was actively working against me. The adoption agency got back to me a few days later. They had reviewed my financial documents and reached out to my references, all of whom vouched for me. They assured me my financial stability was no longer in question. However, they were upfront about their lingering concerns. The anonymous complaint had triggered additional scrutiny, and it wasn't something they could ignore. The process would be delayed while they conducted further checks. Just as I was processing this, Rachel sent me a long message. She accused me of overcompensating for being single, claiming I wasn't equipped to handle the challenges of parenting. It was an unprovoked, cruel attack, and it was clear she wasn't going to back down. I blocked her number and took a deep breath. Enough was enough. I decided to share my experience publicly, without naming Rachel, of course. I posted about the struggles I'd faced during the adoption process and the unexpected obstacles thrown my way. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Friends and even acquaintances reached out, offering encouragement and sharing their own stories of overcoming challenges. But not everyone was on my side. Some mutual friends, clearly influenced by Rachel's narrative, began acting distant, avoiding my calls and ignoring my messages. The background check the agency had to conduct delayed everything by weeks. It was agonizing, knowing that this entire situation had been avoidable if not for one person's petty interference. But I stayed focused. I couldn't let Rachel win. This wasn't just about me, it was about giving a child a chance at a better life. Every time I thought about giving up, I remembered why I started this journey. Despite the chaos Rachel had caused, I wasn't going to let her destroy my dream of becoming a dad. This was only the beginning, and I was ready to fight for what mattered most. Update 2. A few weeks after the anonymous complaint delayed my adoption process, I got a call from a family friend. She had overheard Rachel talking at a gathering, confidently claiming I was financially reckless and emotionally unstable, the same allegations made in the anonymous tip. When pressed, Rachel admitted she had shared concerns with some people but brushed it off as harmless. It wasn't harmless, though. Her words were the reason my adoption process had stalled. This friend also revealed something even more troubling. Rachel had mentioned feeling overshadowed by my adoption plans. Apparently, she didn't want to compete with me in parenting. It was a petty motive, but it explained her behavior. She saw my decision to adopt as a threat to her standing in the family. Armed with this new information, I decided it was time to confront Rachel directly. A family dinner seemed like the right opportunity, especially since my parents would be there. As soon as everyone had settled in, I brought it up. I laid out the evidence, her comments to our relatives, the similarities between the anonymous complaint and her words, and the impact her actions had on my adoption process. Rachel's reaction was immediate. She denied everything, but her face said otherwise. When I mentioned specifics, like the exact phrases she'd used to describe me, she looked visibly shaken. Her denial only made things worse, and the room erupted into chaos. My dad sided with me, demanding Rachel own up to her actions, while my mom insisted I was blowing things out of proportion. Other family members tried to stay neutral, but it was clear lines were being drawn. The fallout was brutal. Some relatives called to tell me they believed me and supported my decision to adopt. Others told me I should let it go, claiming Rachel didn't mean any harm. It felt like I was caught in the middle of a storm, but I stayed focused. The adoption agency was still conducting their investigation, and I couldn't afford any more distractions. A few days later, I got an update from the agency. They had cleared me of all accusations, confirming my financial stability and emotional preparedness. While it was a relief, they warned me that future complaints could jeopardize the process. It was a reminder that this wasn't over yet. I made the decision to cut contact with Rachel temporarily. I needed to focus on my adoption journey and couldn't let her toxic behavior derail me any further. When she realized I wasn't speaking to her, she retaliated. She accused me of turning the family against her and started posting cryptic updates online about betrayal and family drama. It was exhausting, but I ignored her antics. Instead, I leaned on my support network. Close friends and family members who believed in me helped me stay grounded. One friend, a lawyer, advised me to start documenting everything Rachel had done, from her comments to the anonymous complaint. It was solid advice. If Rachel tried to sabotage me again, I'd be ready. Out of the blue, Rachel reached out with what she called an apology. She claimed she had been looking out for me and only wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. It wasn't sincere, and it didn't change anything. I responded firmly, making it clear she would not be involved in my life or my future child's life unless she took accountability and changed her behavior. Not long after, my parents called for a family meeting, hoping to mediate. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it might help clear the air. It didn't. Rachel arrived defensive and hostile, accusing me of trying to destroy her reputation. When I reminded her of the impact her actions had on my adoption process, she stormed out. My dad supported my decision to hold her accountable, but my mom still seemed torn, urging me to keep the peace. Despite the ongoing drama, there was a bright spot. The adoption agency called to let me know my application was back on track. They had completed their investigation and cleared me to move forward. Hearing that news felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized how much stronger I had become. Rachel's interference had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also reaffirmed my commitment to adopting. This wasn't just about proving her wrong. It was about building a future for myself and the child I would soon welcome into my life. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Update 3. When the call came from the adoption agency, my heart stopped. This time, it wasn't another complication, it was the news I had been waiting for. My adoption of a 3-year-old boy, Ethan, had been approved. After all the setbacks, the delays, and the drama, it felt surreal. I thanked the agency, hung up, and immediately started calling the people who had stood by me through everything. My dad was over the moon. Close friends were ecstatic. I didn't even bother telling Rachel. She found out anyway. My parents, excited about Ethan, likely mentioned it to her in passing. Not long after, I received a long, angry text from her. It accused me of ruining her reputation, claiming I had turned the entire family against her. She even said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't respond. I blocked her number along with all her social media profiles, determined to focus on what mattered: Ethan. The day Ethan came home was nothing short of magical. The moment I saw him, I knew all the struggles had been worth it. He was shy at first, clutching a small stuffed bear and looking around nervously. I knelt down and introduced myself, showing him the room I had set up just for him, complete with a bed shaped like a car and walls decorated with his favorite cartoon characters. Slowly but surely, he began to warm up to me. That first evening, we played with blocks, read a bedtime story, and shared a quiet moment as he drifted off to sleep. It was everything I had dreamed of. Rachel, of course, couldn't let me have a moment of peace. She sent another email to the adoption agency, claiming I was unfit to care for a child. This time, the allegation was so outlandish that the agency immediately dismissed it. They called me to let me know what had happened and assured me that my adoption of Ethan was final. They weren't going to entertain any more baseless complaints. My dad, who had been quietly supportive throughout the process, finally lost his patience with Rachel. He called her out, telling her in no uncertain terms that her behavior was unacceptable. She didn't take it well. Within hours, she posted a long-winded rant on social media, painting herself as the victim. She blamed me for tearing the family apart and accused my dad of favoritism. The post got a mixed response. Some people sympathized with her, but many others saw through her dramatics. My mom, torn between her children, tried to mediate. She suggested I reconcile with Rachel for the sake of family unity. I refused. I told her I was done with Rachel's toxic behavior and needed to focus on Ethan. It didn't go over well, but I stood my ground. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had a son to think about. Life with Ethan quickly became my new normal. We spent our days exploring parks, visiting the library, and working on puzzles together. I enrolled in parenting classes to make sure I was giving him the best care possible. Watching him grow more confident and happy was the most rewarding experience of my life. Still, Rachel wasn't done. She escalated her attacks, this time anonymously contacting Child Protective Services (CPS). The accusation? Neglect. When CPS showed up at my door, I was stunned but cooperative. They conducted a thorough inspection of my home, reviewed Ethan's medical records, and interviewed me. After a few days, they cleared me of any wrongdoing and closed the case. While I was relieved, it was also a wake-up call. Rachel's actions weren't just petty anymore. They were dangerous. I consulted a lawyer to discuss my options. The lawyer recommended taking steps to legally protect myself and Ethan, whether through a restraining order or another form of intervention. It was a sobering moment. I had always hoped Rachel would come around, but her actions made it clear she wouldn't stop unless forced to. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving. He started laughing more, opening up about his favorite toys and games, and even began calling me dad. Every milestone was a reminder of why I had fought so hard to adopt him. My lawyer filed the necessary paperwork to begin the process of securing a restraining order against Rachel. As I waited for the legal proceedings to play out, I realized this was the last straw. Rachel's interference had gone too far, and it was time to make a decisive move. My focus had to remain on Ethan and building a peaceful, loving home for him. Whatever it took, I would make sure Rachel could never disrupt our lives again. Update 4. The first step in protecting Ethan and myself was documenting everything Rachel had done. I compiled a detailed record of her harassment, texts, emails, and even screenshots of her social media posts. Family and friends who had witnessed her behavior provided written statements. The CPS visit was the tipping point, and my lawyer assured me the evidence was strong enough to support a restraining order. Filing the legal paperwork felt both empowering and nerve-wracking. Rachel's interference had gone from petty sabotage to dangerous escalation, and I couldn't risk her causing further harm. The restraining order cited her repeated harassment, including the false CPS complaint and her attempts to disrupt the adoption process. My lawyer filed it quickly, and we waited for the court date. News of the restraining order spread through the family like wildfire. My dad fully supported my decision and didn't hold back in calling out Rachel's behavior. A few relatives sided with me as well, saying Rachel's actions had gone too far. But others accused me of overreacting. They said I was tearing the family apart by taking legal action against my own sister. It was frustrating, but I stayed focused. This wasn't about the family, it was about protecting Ethan. At the court hearing, Rachel tried to justify her actions, claiming she was only acting in Ethan's best interest. She painted herself as the concerned aunt, insisting she had no malicious intent. But the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming, and her flimsy excuses didn't hold up under scrutiny. The court granted the restraining order, barring Rachel from contacting me, Ethan, or the adoption agency in any way. Rachel's fury was immediate. She retaliated by cutting off contact with my parents, blaming them for taking my side. My dad shrugged it off, but my mom struggled with the rift. She became increasingly torn, trying to convince me to reconcile with Rachel for the sake of family unity. When I refused, the tension between us grew. Despite the legal win, the emotional toll was heavy. I started therapy to process everything that had happened, the harassment, the family drama, and the constant stress. The therapist helped me focus on creating a healthy, stable environment for Ethan. I learned how to navigate the guilt of family estrangement while prioritizing my role as a father. Rachel wasn't done stirring up trouble, even from a distance. She pressured our mom to choose sides, which led to more arguments and strained relationships. My mom eventually gave me an ultimatum: reconcile with Rachel or risk losing her support. It was a heartbreaking moment, but I refused to give in. I calmly told her that if she couldn't respect my boundaries, I would have to limit contact with her as well. My dad, ever supportive, reassured me I was doing the right thing. He started visiting more often, helping me with parenting tasks and offering advice as I adjusted to life with Ethan. The support I found outside the family was just as crucial. I joined a local group for single parents, where I met others who understood the unique challenges of raising a child alone. Their encouragement and shared experiences made me feel less isolated. They celebrated milestones with me, like the day Ethan first called me dad. Hearing that word from him solidified everything I had worked for. He was thriving, laughing more, making friends at the park, and settling into his new life. With the restraining order in place, Rachel finally went silent. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. There were no more surprise emails, no anonymous complaints, and no cryptic social media posts. Ethan and I could finally focus on building our life together without the shadow of her interference. The journey wasn't easy, but every step reaffirmed my decision to protect Ethan at all costs. The family rift was painful, but I knew I had made the right choice. Ethan's happiness and well-being came first, and I wasn't going to let anyone jeopardize that. Update 5. It's been a year since Ethan officially became my son, and looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago that I was caught up in the chaos Rachel caused. Ethan and I have come so far since that day, and the transformation has been incredible. He's now a confident, happy 4-year-old who loves preschool, his new friends, and anything to do with dinosaurs. Watching him grow and thrive has been the most rewarding experience of my life. Ethan started preschool a few months after moving in with me, and while he was shy at first, he's blossomed. His teachers have commented on how quickly he adjusted, and he's even made a best friend, a boy named Liam who lives just down the street. Every morning, Ethan looks forward to school, and in the afternoons, we spend time playing in the park or reading his favorite dinosaur books. His laughter fills the house now, a far cry from the quiet, hesitant child who first walked through my door. My relationship with my dad has remained solid throughout this journey. He's been a constant presence, always ready with advice or a helping hand. He's even taken on the role of grandpa with enthusiasm, spoiling Ethan with small gifts and trips to the toy store. My mom, on the other hand, has been more complicated. While we still speak occasionally, our relationship is limited. She's still conflicted about Rachel, though she seems to have accepted that reconciliation isn't on the table. I keep our conversations polite but brief, focusing on Ethan and steering clear of family drama. As for Rachel, she stayed out of my life entirely. The restraining order, combined with the loss of family support, seems to have kept her at bay. I've heard through mutual friends that her marriage is struggling, and part of the tension comes from her inability to let go of her obsession with my life. While I wouldn't wish harm on her, I can't deny the relief I feel knowing she's no longer able to interfere with my family. Therapy has been a game changer. Over the past year, I've worked through the lingering effects of Rachel's actions and the broader family dynamics that allowed her behavior to go unchecked for so long. My therapist has helped me focus on setting healthy boundaries and building a life centered on positivity and growth. It's been hard work, but I'm in a much better place now. To celebrate Ethan's adoption anniversary, I threw a small party with close friends and supportive family members. We kept it simple: cake, balloons, and lots of laughter. Ethan was the star of the day, running around with his friends and showing off his favorite dinosaur toys. It was a beautiful moment, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. My mom even attended, and to my surprise, apologized for pressuring me to reconcile with Rachel. She admitted she hadn't fully understood the harm Rachel had caused and thanked me for standing firm. It felt like a step forward. My dad, as always, had the perfect advice. He pulled me aside during the party and reminded me to keep focusing on Ethan and my own happiness. The past is the past, he said, and you've built something amazing here. Don't let anyone take that from you. His words stuck with me, and I've carried them forward ever since. One of the unexpected joys of this journey has been the friendships I've formed with other single parents. Through local support groups and preschool events, I've built a network of people who understand the unique challenges and triumphs of raising a child alone. These friendships have been a source of encouragement and inspiration, reminding me that I'm not in this alone. On the legal front, my lawyer recently checked in to confirm that Rachel hasn't made any attempts to contest the restraining order or interfere further. It's a relief to know that chapter of my life is truly closed. Without her constant meddling, I've been able to focus entirely on Ethan and our future. Career-wise, things have also been looking up. I recently received a promotion at work, which has provided additional financial stability. It's allowed me to plan for things like a family vacation, something Ethan and I are both excited about. Every decision I make now is with him in mind, and knowing I can provide him with security and opportunities is deeply fulfilling. Looking ahead, my priority is teaching Ethan the values that matter most: kindness, resilience, and the importance of chosen family. While our biological family may not be perfect, we've built a new family from the people who truly care about us. It's a lesson I hope he carries with him as he grows. As I write this final update, I'm filled with gratitude. Despite the obstacles, I found peace, joy, and a sense of purpose in raising Ethan. Our journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every challenge. The future looks bright, and I can't wait to see what's next for us.